listening to Inside Public Accounting, a brand new podcast telling the stories behind the numbers. If you're a first-time listener to the show, we really welcome you. If you've been with us for the journey, we're a few episodes in now. It's lovely that you're joining us. This is where we break down the numbers and the stories shaping the accounting profession. I'm in the UK and I'm Rob Brown.
And I'm Chelsea Summers, the Executive Director of Inside Public Accounting. Today, we're going to be diving deep into the full landscape of the IPA 500, not just from the top, but the 400 that follow as well. Because let's face it, the real story of the profession is a lot bigger than those top 100 firms.
It is, and we learned that in the last episode, Chelsea, where we dug into some of the new entrants and some of the big movers in there and who's pushing the top 100. And it is prestigious. People wait for these. They're hanging on them, have submitted their data. It's like waiting for your test scores, isn't it? So it's an exciting time. Let's dive into it. And let's start with the top 100. Who stood out in the 2025 data?
Yeah, so this year, top firms aren't just chasing size, they're really chasing performance. Organic slowed to 7.8%, still very healthy, but net income surged to 12.5%. This tells us that firms are getting leaner, smarter, and more strategic.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the firm of the future and what firms in 2030 will look like. And leaner is definitely right, because the work that used to be done by 10 people can now be done by 3. So teams are going to be smaller, more modular, more project-based, more hybrid remote working, more outsourcing, offshore. All of these things are in play, not to mention the technology. So that's fascinating. And we've hinted before, haven't we, that the profession seems to be recalibrating. There's a lot of change and transition going on. Just give us an insight, Chelsea, about what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, so firms are really starting to rethink their service mix. They're investing in leadership, and they're gradually experimenting with alternative pricing structures, although the traditional hours times rate billing model still dominates for most firms. But there's also a shift in mindset. Firms are asking questions now, less about how do we grow our headcount and more about how do we grow value. And I think that shows up in how they're pricing, how they're staffing at their firms, and how they're structuring their services. Productivity is up. Net revenue per employee hit a record of $242,000 this year. But firms are also spending more strategically, including in offshore talent and in technology.
We keep coming back to that word strategically. It is so important. But that just say that stat again about productivity and net revenue, Chelsea. That's astonishing.
Yeah, so net revenue per employee has hit a record number, 242,711 this year. So that's the revenue that the firm is bringing in per each employee, that whether that's an employee that sits in their office or an employee that's offshore.
Goodness me, there's money to be made in their accounting firms for sure. And we got to talk about private equity. Just speak to us about that.
Yeah, PE-backed firms in the 100 are really rewriting the rules. So we looked at kind of how those private equity-backed firms are faring versus those firms that are staying independent and don't have that backing right now. The private equity firms had 26.7% income growth compared to that 12.1% for those non-PE peers. It's not just about money. They're driving the change in governance and compensation and in efficiency. It's really early days in a lot of these firms and the investments, but I think we're seeing a widening in the performance gap of the firms.
The gap between the good and the great, perhaps. We hear a lot about specialization, Chelsea, niching, picking your target markets. What do we know about that?
Yeah. So in our analysis, we did a deep dive into those specialist firms, those firms that focus more than 45% of their revenue from a core area, whether that's tax or assurance or non-compliance like advisory services. Across the board, those specialist firms are outperforming the IPA 100 in some important metrics.
So picking a lane actually pays off, doesn't it?
It really does. For example, tax-focused firms have the highest average income per equity partner at $1.12 million. That's about 18% up from the IPA 100 average. They're also posting the highest net income margins at 27.8%, which tells us that they're not just bringing in the revenue, they're converting it into profit more efficiently.
I know an accountant based out of San Antonio, Texas. He's only got a 10-person firm, so he wouldn't be hitting the IPA 500 yet.
Not yet.
But he will be growing. Chris Johnson, he specializes in 401k audits for construction companies. So doesn't do any tax, doesn't do any assurance, but talk about a specialization, and he's absolutely crushing it. So yeah, it's brave to pick a lane, Chelsea, isn't it? Because I heard this lovely anecdote once. Women love men to propose to them, not because they're saying yes to that woman, but because they're saying no to every other woman in the world for the rest of their life. And when you specialize, you've got to be brave enough to say no to a lot of things and say, yeah, we are going all out for this.
Yeah, you're not chasing the new shiny object. You're really digging deep into an area that you feel like you're the best at and really making that your brand.
Yeah. Let's hit productivity. People talk a lot about productivity and margins and how efficient we are, particularly if private equity is involved. Have you got something behind that?
Yeah, so tax specialists are still leading the pack, generating 256,000 in net revenue per employee. That's well above the averages for those assurance focused firms and the non-compliance specialists.
Yeah.
And it really shows how streamlined these firms have become in terms of delivering and pricing power.
So we've got compliance is still very much the backbone, the tax, the assurance, the audit services. What about non-compliance specialists? There's money to be made there, right?
Yeah, those firms are fascinating. Those firms are leveraging large teams to scale. They have 16.8 FTEs per equity partner, which is the highest leverage ratio that we're seeing. And that's really paying off. Revenue per equity partner averages nearly 4 million, which is the highest of any of the groups
Four
for those
million per equity partner.
non-compliance firms. Yes.
That's massive. So what's the takeaway there?
I think specialization is a strategic advantage, whether that's pricing power and tax, or scalability and advisory, or tech driven stability and audit. I think these firms that are leading into a focused model are really outperforming those generalists. And that kind of focus doesn't mean being boxed in to that one woman for the rest of your life. In fact, many of these specialists are expanding faster because they built those reputations as the go to firms in their niches. That opens the door for premium pricing, for referral growth, and deeper client relationships, all without needing that huge national scale. It's not about being very narrow, it's about being deep. And I think that depth is really translating into stronger financials and firm health.
Yeah. And I love that phrase, the go-to firm. There's something in business called the paradox of choice. And the question is this: when I need what you do, why should I go to you, your firm, above and beyond all the other choices that I've got, including the choice to do nothing? I do it myself. And when you are that go-to firm, that standout firm, and you've really nailed those colors to the mast, as it were, you become that standout go-to choice. So that's fascinating that your figures are bearing that out. What about firm size? We're seeing big mergers and big plays and big numbers. It feels like the bar's just getting higher, Chelsea.
It is and it has. This
Right.
year, you have to go all the way to number 67 on the IPA 100 list to find a firm less than 100 million in revenue. That is a monumental shift. Back in 1991, when the IPA 100 list first began as the Bowman Top 100, only 4 firms outside of the then Big Six had crossed that $100 million mark. Now we've got 62 firms above that line, and 11 of those firms are above $1 billion.
I saw a stat recently that said in the US, 20 years ago, there were 36 billionaires, and now there are 800 billionaires
Oh
in
my
the
gosh.
US. Yeah, there's more and more wealth being created for sure. And it seems that that $1 million milestone is not the outlier anymore. That's practically your entry fee to get in the game. It's your ticket to the match.
Exactly. And when you adjust for inflation, 100 million today is roughly equivalent to 42 million back in 1991. Even by that 42 million metric, only 6 firms from the original list would qualify. And that shows how far the profession has come, not just in the size of the firms, but in the complexity and structure and ambition of these top 100 firms.
Well, let's move outside the top 100 because as much as they are the big employers and where a lot of accountants hang out, there's a lot going on after that top 100. There's a lot of amazing firms, thousands of them out there doing incredible things. So what did we learn from the firms ranked 101 to say 500, Chelsea?
Yeah, so these firms are really the bedrock of the profession. They're smaller, yes, but they're increasingly becoming more sophisticated. Many are growing through focused service lines, smart use of outsourcing, and regional dominance. More importantly, they're closer to their communities, both geographically and operationally. Many of these firms are where innovation is quietly happening, plotting new staffing models, they're testing cast and delivery models, they're building long term client loyalty that doesn't always show up in national headlines.
They're innovating.
They sure are.
What about the IPA 200? Because people are always, which category do I fit in? Have I made the top 10? Have I made the top 50? Have I made the top 100? Am I in the top 200? So let's specifically look at those that are pushing the top 100, maybe in the top 100, because I know that your figures show that they're pulling in over 3.8 billion in total revenue and averaging almost 3 million per equity partner. That's not small potatoes, is it?
Exactly. Their organic slowed slightly to 7.5%, but many of these firms are managing to grow through M&A and service diversification. Almost 70% of these top 200 firms are using offshore staffing. They're becoming more efficient without losing their regional strength.
So it's such a story, and it's fascinating to see the shifts. So we looked at 100, we looked at 200. Tell us about the IPA 300.
There's a great story there. They posted 11.1% income growth, which is better than the 100 and 200.
Wow.
Client accounting services and investment advisory are rising. These firms may not be billion-dollar players yet, but they are agile, profitable, and future focused.
And that makes sense from the people I know in those firms because they're smaller, they're more agile, they've got a small amount of people with very dedicated expertise, and they are very much non-compliance. They'll do it, but their margins are in the project-based stuff, the consulting stuff, the fractional stuff, all of that advisory, future-looking things that they don't need to get bogged down in the old ways, the old legacy technologies. Fascinating. What about the 400 and the 500 tiers?
So the IP 400 are pushing ahead with some regional strength. Many of those firms still rely on the traditional hours times rates billing models, but they're slowly integrating into fixed fee work. The IPA 500, our smallest tier that we rank, actually had the lowest turnover this year at 9.3%, showing that they're focused, stable, and they're deeply connected to their clients.
Love that. Focused, stable, deeply connected to clients. And I've seen a lot of stats, as everyone has, about the layoffs of the big firms who overhired during the pandemic. And you just wonder where those people are going. There's a lot of refreshing things happening in these smaller firms and a home for these really experienced people. And in a year where the margins seem to be tightening, these smaller firms are looking like they have great loyalty, great retention, and even
Yeah.
great attraction of new quality people.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of that matters. Whether it's staff stability, client intimacy, or pricing power, these firms show that success is not just about the scale. It's also about knowing the market and running lean.
Let's talk about compensation, packages, salaries, all of these things going on. We hear a lot about how accounting packages, salaries are not very competitive, but you dig in behind the numbers here. What have you found?
Yeah, it's certainly a topic that's getting a little bit more complicated every year. In the 2025 IPA 100, we saw average partner compensation rise again. But the story behind those numbers is really starting to shift. More firms are moving away from an equal split or tenure based model and really starting to tie compensation to things like performance or business development or team leadership.
So it might be the demise of the equity model, but we're not just saying you've made partner, here's your share.
Exactly. We're really starting to see the rise of what some firms are calling merit modified models. That means compensation is tied to the value the partner is bringing, not just billing hours, but really mentoring talent, leading firm strategy, or expanding services.
Staying relevant, staying in the game, making your contribution. How's private equity affecting that?
I think it's a lot of it's being pushed forward by private equity. And those PE backed firms, models are starting to shift dramatically. Partner equity might be replaced by profit sharing or leadership bonus. And while that's appealing to some, it also raises questions about long term alignment and autonomy, especially in mid sized firms.
I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions about that, Chelsea, aren't we? And we do encourage our listeners, our viewers to submit questions and share with us your thoughts. You can find us in a number of different places now that the show is growing. And we probably got a future episode in that about the private equity backed firms and what's happening in those. So let's start to wrap things up, Chelsea. Where are we at now? We've got this future episode. We're going to come back to this, aren't we?
We definitely will be coming back to this, especially as more firms are starting to evaluate what the partnership means in today's profession. The question of what is an equity partner when I started at Inside Public Accounting more than 10 years ago was a very cut and dry answer. This is what a partner means. This year, I've had so many conversations with firms saying, hey, we're not really sure at our firm what qualifies for an equity partner in your survey anymore. At first, I was like, what do you mean? That seems very straightforward. But really, what these firms look like in their staffing models and their partnership structures are changing so dramatically. So looking forward to talking about that and breaking it down more in future episodes.
Well, this has been a great show. If you've not checked it out, look at the last show where we give you the headline figures and the movers and shakers, who's come in and who's come out. Now we've delved a little bit into the trends behind these figures. What's the big takeaway from the full IPA 500 list that you've done, Chelsea?
Yeah, to me, the big takeaway is that the profession is starting to evolve, and different types of firms are really taking different approaches. The IP 100 are setting the pace for the strategy and the scalability, but those firms ranked number 101 to 500 are really showing their strength through their focus and their resilience and their regional relevance.
The big thing I'm taking from this is that there is not one right way to do it. We used to know what best practice was. We used to know the way to grow an accounting firm, the way to succeed. But we're seeing so many different models, aren't we? The PE-backed firm, the specialist firm, the regional, the hybrid, and all of these offer us lessons of different ways to play the game.
Yeah. Whether you're managing partner of a top 50 firm or you're running a $10 million local practice or a 401k specialing in the construction industry, the message is really still the same. Strategy wins. Know who you are, invest with intention, and keep your eye on where the profession is heading.
And we will point the trends out to you and get you forward thinking as much as we can here on the Inside Public Accounting podcast. That's it for today's show, where you had a full look at the IPA 500. This show drops every Tuesday. And next Tuesday, we're shifting gears a little bit.
We're going to be asking a big question. Is the profession dominated by legacy firms, or is there still room for new players to break through?
That's such a great topic. And you can't answer something like that if you haven't done the numbers like you've done and all of the research, Chelsea. And this is why this is such a unique podcast in this space. I love digging into the data behind the firm and how it ages over time and exploring what it takes to get into that 500 or 200 or wherever your firm is aiming. And we like to shine a light, don't we, on the spotlight, the standout firms that are doing it, either with private equity or on their own.
Yeah. If you've ever wondered whether a firm that was founded 20 years ago can still make waves, this is the episode for you.
Well, that's great. And that's what's coming up on the next show coming up Tuesday on Inside Public Accounting Podcast. Make sure you don't miss it.
Thanks for joining us. If you found today's episode helpful, we appreciate it if you share it with your team or your fellow firm leaders, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.